Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first Achates Live of 2021 on a very snowy Tuesday, the 9th of February. And once again, it is great to see so many familiar faces over on the YouTube live chat. My name is Kane Moore, and I am Director of Development at Achates Philanthropy and your host for today's session. And we are delighted to be joined by Achates Director, Caroline McCormick, who will be leading today's workshop. Good afternoon, Caroline.
Hi, Kane, sorry.
For those joining for the first time, a very brief introduction to who we are. Achates Philanthropy is a creative consultancy with a holistic approach to fundraising and cultural sector strategy. We take our name from Greek and Roman mythology. Achates was the close friend and loyal advisor to Aeneas, and we think our name pretty neatly describes the relationship we offer to the sector. We set up Achates Live to support the sector through COVID-19 and beyond, bringing fundraisers together to discuss key topics and also to enable you to help each other. We don't have all the answers, but we do have an overview of the cultural sector, and we like to use this role in a supportive way. Today's session focuses on business planning as we look towards the sector's recovery and renewal in the financial year ahead. However, as so much of last year was spent setting out plans and then rapidly having to adapt and shift these in response to quickly changing restrictions, we know that for many of you, the thought of writing new business plans for the period ahead can feel, well, really overwhelming. With so many unknowns around what will replace the current national lockdown, when venues will even be allowed to reopen, what the vaccination programme means for audiences returning to in-person events, the idea of setting out a business plan can often feel a bit like a game of 3D chess, where we have to keep multiple scenarios and assumptions running at once. However, with the need to submit plans for the final Arts Council MPO year, and the next national portfolio organisation round fast approaching, we thought that a session dedicated to business planning would be well timed. And with so many unknowns in the period ahead, we at Achates are also working to support the sector by carrying out a survey supported by Spectrix to set out a benchmark for key information needed as part of the business planning process, such as expected audience and attendance levels and donor retention rates. We will be sending this out shortly, and we would be really immensely grateful if you could take part and help the sector plan for what's next. Okay, I think that is enough of an introduction for me. So all that is left for me to do is introduce you to today's brilliant expert panel. So firstly, Fiona. Hello, Fiona.
Hi, Kane.
Hi. So Fiona is the Executive Director and Interim CEO of the King's Head Theatre, a 110-seat fringe theatre in Islington, known for its commitment to emerging artists, groundbreaking opera, and promoting LGBTQ+ voices. Since joining in 2017, Fiona has helped the King's Head transform its business model, including topping their largest grant of previously just £300 with an immense £800,000 grant from the GLA. Fiona has previously worked for the Gate Theatre, Greenbelt Festivals, and the Old Vic. Our next panellist is Matthew. Matthew, can you say a hello for me, please?
Hello, how's it going, everyone?
Good, thank you. So Matthew is the artistic director and founder of Bounce Cinema, an organisation dedicated to building a fairer future for communities to access the world of film. All year round, Bounce creates opportunities through screenings, events, and workshops, partnering with organisations big and small, from Southwark Council all the way through to Google. Matthew is also a BFI Network talent executive, commissioning new filmmakers looking to take their work to the next level. And finally, Liam. Liam, can I have a hello?
Pnawn da from North Wales, pawb.
Oh, so Liam is the Executive Director of Theatre Clwyd, and he took up his post in 2016. During his time, the organisation has increased its annual turnover by £2 million, won UK Theatre, Olivier and Stage Awards for their work, and progressed an ambitious and essential £40 million capital development of their 70s building. Liam is also chair of Crew Cymru. Am I pronouncing that right?
We can work on your Welsh pronunciation.
So sorry. The development agency for theatres and art centres in Wales. He sits on the UK Theatre Workforce and Marcom's working groups and the Wales Arts, Health and Wellbeing Steering Committee. And finally, over to you, Caroline, to kick off today's session.
Thanks so much, Kane, and welcome to our three fantastic panellists, all of whom I've been waiting for the opportunity to invite to come and speak at Achates Live. So thank you for your time today. It's wonderful to have you with us. So many of you joining us today will know Achates for our fundraising services. We've always used that as a way into starting our conversation with organisations. But as Kane said, we are also very much a strategy and development organisation, and of course that includes business planning as well. And that business planning work is very close to my heart because, as some of you all know already, I spent 5 years as director of PEN International, the largest organisation in the world representing writers. And I spent those 5 years largely on a plane and in terrible hotel rooms, but working with those centres, developing and implementing strategies to support their hugely varied portfolio of activity and sheer scale and size of operations across those 145 centres in 105 countries, but really getting them to think together to optimise their impact whilst building resilience. I was the first person to have the opportunity to hold that role, and when I took it up, I started to consider how we might work with the centres. Was I simply going to do something nice for a centre every 2 days? What was it I was trying to do? So we started to develop a regionally focused plan that drew on shared goals, an understanding of the priorities of their communities and the need to drive major funding to make that work happen. We drew on that experience to build regional level strategic plans and business plans for the organisations. The first region we focused on was Africa, where there were 17 centres, each of them absolutely unique and individual, and each of them quite clear with us that they would not be treated as a homogenous group, and quite rightly so too. However, when we gathered the centres together, very quickly clear themes started to emerge, and at the same time, clear principles as to how we might approach those issues became very clear, and they underpinned our strategic plan. In a similar way, at Achates, over the last 7 years now, during which we've worked with more than 500 cultural organisations in the UK, we've seen similar principles emerge. And the main point I would really like you to all think about in going into your business planning process, I'm going to borrow from the woman that I worked with very closely during that time and was a trustee of the charity of, was the first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, an incredible woman called Professor Wangari Maathai, whose ideas, although she passed away several years ago now, are more relevant than ever today. Wangari always used a metaphor of a three-legged African stool for the elements essential to stable governance: sustainable environmental management, democratic governance, and a culture of peace. And today, in our own modest way, I'm going to borrow her metaphor and apply it to the cultural organisation, because it seems to me that what we've learned over these last years is that what every arts organisation needs to find a balance in for themselves is a three-legged stool of art, audiences, and money. At Achates, we always start with the art, and it is, of course, critical that this work is excellent. All communities deserve access to great art. As many of you know, Achates' principles and approach is underpinned by what we call our audience-informed approach, which means a careful consideration of who you are serving and what role you are playing in their lives, be it simply intrinsic joy through to social impact and more instrumental activity. Perhaps of all the hackneyed phrases that we use in the cultural sector, the one I feel least comfortable with is widest possible audience, which to me too often reads, I haven't fully reflected deeply and honestly about who we can really serve, because very, very few organisations have the capacity to really serve everyone at a deep level. This means taking choices and taking ownership and responsibility of our choices, but doing so is hugely empowering and starts to underpin the second leg of that three-legged stool. The third leg that none of us can afford not to think about is money. With my friend Susanna Lane, I've been speaking on the MA at King's in cultural management for several years now, and every year we tell a very surprised new cohort that they may have come onto the course thinking only about art, but no matter what their role will be, inevitably they're going to spend a large portion of their time also thinking about audiences and money. And we start to try to give them the skills, the tools to do so. Here at Achates, when we start working with a client on their business planning, what we do is take them through a process of thinking about and refining 5 main areas of focus, all through the lens of our audience-informed approach. Firstly, their role, purpose, and offer. What does that organisation, that likely to be charity, but that organisation exist to do? And to really refine and understand that. And then to consider very carefully its current and future audiences, so the first 2 legs of the stool. Then its communications, what it's trying to do with and for each audience group. Then voluntary income generation, which I would argue is always the outcome of a clear understanding and deep relationship with an audience group. Commercial income generation follows the same principles, just uses different methodologies. And then we bring those 5 elements together in a perfectly balanced whole that reflects the core purpose, the priority of the audience, and at the same time, the income generation possibilities available to it, enabling that organisation to do great work and produce great art. But enough from me. Today, we are really lucky to have 3 expert panelists with us who are leading 3 very different organisations of scale, location, and art form. And they're going to share their insights and approaches to business planning with you. So really wonderful to welcome you all again, Fiona, Matthew, and Liam. Fiona, may I turn to you first to really ask you to reflect a little on King's Head Theatre, what you've been going through as an organisation and how you're approaching business planning at this time. Thanks, Fiona.
Sure, thanks for inviting me. I should say, as with many people currently enjoying working from home, I have the joy of working from my kitchen. And so you may hear rustlings in the background, and I can only apologise in advance for my husband's need to have lunch. So while undertaking the start of a rebrand project and ahead of a move to a new space at the start of 2019, the word that kept coming up when we talked about the King's Head Theatre was the word maverick. And repeatedly people would ask me, why do we still use the word maverick to describe the King's Head? It's so outdated. It doesn't mean anything. No one's maverick anymore. Who's constantly having to change in today's society? Fast forward to exactly a year ago today, and I was standing in a dining room that seated 400 people, holding the King's Head's first ever successful fundraising gala. On that night, celebrating our 50th birthday, 400 people in a room, can you imagine? We raised £100,000, and a month later was when we found out that we'd received the GLA grant of £800,000. All this for an organisation that, as I say, when I joined in 2017, had only ever raised £300 for a washing machine before. The King's Head is amazing, but one of the problems with being a fringe theatre is that you've often had to grow really quickly and to a really large scale without much structure behind you. So questions that I would ask when I became the King's Head's first executive director included things like, what's the reserves policy? To which my staff team would answer, what are reserves? And that context has made definitely navigating 2020 more challenging than I think it would for other organisations. I often think that we move into this space of leading organisations expecting that everyone has been up to date with how things should be run and have been in line with policies and up to date with everything from financial planning to good governance. And really the thing I've continually learned is it's really good to ask questions. A huge part of the success of the King's Head, and financially our success, is ticket sales. And so in 2019, we had 774 performances of 96 different shows to 105,000 audience members, generating 86% of our income. In 2020, 84% of our income came from fundraising, something that I could have never believed was possible in 2017. That dramatic shift is partially because of one question that we've repeatedly asked ourselves, and ultimately that forms the entirety of our business planning. Why? Every single week I ask my staff team, why us? Why the King's Head? Why here? Why now? Why the King's Head? What's unique about us? What's unique about what we have to offer, about our communities, about how we can serve our communities through this pandemic? Why Islington? Why London? Why the digital space even? Why do artists repeatedly cry out for needing doors to be open to them in our industry when we ourselves joke that the industry is really small when you're on the inside? Why now? So in 2019, those 106,000 audience members versus 2020's 66,000 digital members. What's relevant to what is happening in 2020 that we can speak to and we can help with? What does having a staff team of 9 and £1 million turnover have? How does that change to having a turnover of £400,000 and a staff team of 9? How does that enable us to be different in 2020? And for us, that meant it gave us a chance to breathe, to plan, to take stock, to not have to run and do the front of house call while also trying to do the banking one night, while also dealing with the flooding that was happening in the toilets downstairs. It's a very glamorous life as an ED of a fringe theatre, but instead to be able to sit behind my computer and repeatedly ask questions like, why? So for the first time in a really long time, we've had a chance to lay some proper foundations. And that in turn has reaped rewards in how people have supported us. So rather than scream and cry about what hasn't happened, we've been able to recenter ourselves before our planned move to a new space, transform our business model from a fundraising point of view, and passionately not chase funding, but just stay true to who we are. I'm a fundraiser by trade. Before I was an ED, I worked in many different development departments. And the reason I chose to leave development as my sole career was because I was frustrated by organisations asking me to chase pots of funding without heart. And for me, the bigger question today, therefore, is how can we, the King's Head, ask questions of our audiences and take them on journeys that say, this is who we are. We'd love you to come on that journey with us. Same maverick King's Head, totally different financial model currently, but ultimately the same if you cut us through to the core.
Thank you, Fiona. That's incredibly inspiring. I love your breathe, plan, take stock and your constant questioning. But more than anything, I really just want to come back in due course to that point about it not being the fundraisers that chase the money, which is a really common misapprehension. I would say that I think that most fundraisers know that if you just chase the money, you quickly lose integrity and therefore value. So there's no point in that. So thank you. It's wonderful to hear your ideas. Liam, may I come to you next? Obviously, different scenario again, although you've also got a capital project underway, perhaps at a slightly earlier stage, and obviously a different, very different geographical location and scale.
Yes, well, thank you also for having me. And Fiona, absolutely, toilets are a big part of my job as well, regardless of pandemics. Do you know what, as a senior team at Theatre Clwyd at the moment, we are trying to go easy on ourselves, actually, with our business planning. Not that we aren't asking questions, but that we won't have many of the answers, because it's all guesswork. Nobody really has the answers out of this, do they? So at the moment, we've planned and we've agreed with our board that the whole of our next financial year is based on a physically distanced year. I'm saying physically distanced because we're not using the term socially distanced. We want to stay socially close and keep people at a physical distance whilst it's needed for people's safety. So that's right through. And in Wales, we have a slightly different context, both with funding, but also with distancing. We've been 2 meters all the way through, and actually theatres haven't been able to open at all since March last year. So everything that we're trying to do at the moment is build in certainty of delivery, which sounds mad, doesn't it? But how can we offer certainty to the many, many freelancers we employ and to our teams that when we say we're going to make something, everybody will get paid and we will make it? So, for example, our produced programme of work, and we're lucky because we produce a lot of our work as well as receive things. So we have an element of control. From May onwards, we'll try and do it inside with physical distancing. If we can't, we'll do it outside with physical distancing. If we can't do that, worst case scenario, because both of the last lockdowns you've been able to film and capture, we'll do that. And everybody will get paid their full wage. So that certainty we're trying to build in. I'm not saying we're doing it successfully all the time, but giving some bedrocks. This year, we're completely seeing about building back confidence and building back the loyalty that we had gained. And we're really going to be leaning on those audiences and communities we know are most loyal to us. Everybody's got them in their mailing list, the people that come, 4 to 10 times a year or spend more time with you. So we're going to be leaning on those. Beyond that, we've got some really big challenges. So we're just about to change governance. So Theatre Clwyd has, for its 44-year history, been run by a local authority. I am a civil servant by employment at the moment, which is a really important thing for us to hold on to, actually. But we are moving to a charitable trust and independent trading group, which will offer more flexibility. And that's been brilliant because we're creating it from the start. We're building a board from the start. We're not having to unpick historical challenges and issues. And of course, this year has shone a light on how we might go about that. We've also got a £40 million plus capital redevelopment that's absolutely essential. And the planning through that, we'd agreed years ago with all of the major stakeholders. And the plan was to not close the building at any point, to make sure that we were bringing people up to our theatre and our hill, regardless of the different capital phases. We hadn't envisaged being closed for a year before that, of course. So replanning around that becomes even more important. What I'd say our biggest business planning pillar is people, basing everything around people. And we've done a lot of work over the last 3 or 4 years as a team of really moving our community work to the heart alongside world-class theatre making of what we do. And the pandemic has rushed that forward. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to deliver a lot of the things we've done during this time without that pre-work. But the questions we are asking every day is, how can we help? Who can we help? So people, and we go back to our mission, actually. We, as a team, all came together around 4 years ago, and we wrote our mission together, and it's to make the world a happier place one moment at a time. And that's quite broad, isn't it? But everything fits into it. Putting on a musical, putting films on in our cinema, feeding people, all of these things at the moment are really important. So yes, ask questions, include others. I definitely, as the leader of the organisation, don't have all the answers. Why would I? That's why there are other brilliant people involved. And data and all of that, but actually, what do people need? What do people want? That's our main staple for business planning.
Thank you, Liam. And I think we can all recite as a mantra to ourselves, who can we help? How can we help? It's a pretty good place to start. And I have to say, one of the reasons I'm so grateful to all of you coming and speaking today is it's an incredibly brave thing to do, because none of us knows what's going to happen next. But I can tell you that one thing that certainly will be happening is I think everybody's going to be using your physically rather than socially distanced. I think it's a very important differentiation that we can all hold on to. So thank you, Liam. That's wonderful. And it's really my great pleasure now to turn to you, Matthew, because Matthew's at a really exciting stage in his organisation's journey, Bound Cinema, that he founded. And you're really just finding your way in terms of evolving as a formal organisation and putting your plans together. Matthew, could you tell us a bit more about what you're doing? I think you're still on mute there, Matthew, sorry. It's the curse of Zoom. Oh, let's see if we can do something about that, Matthew. It's, for some reason, it's still on mute. Kane, can you help us with Matthew's sound at all? I can't seem to take it off mute. And you definitely don't want to hear me talk for Matthew, because it won't be half as interesting.
Let me see if I can solve that with Matthew, and then we'll come back to him in a second, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So Liam and Fiona, just while we're looking at Matthew's sound, you've both got capital projects that are in development. Has that really been another, I mean, obviously it's an important factor in your business planning, but are you both taking longer than you were, or what are you both thinking about incorporating that into your planning at this time? Fiona, do you want to go first?
It's really hard to say. And I think the biggest thing I've learned about business planning is my former belief that a 5-year business plan is a brilliant idea is a bit irrelevant in a coronavirus world. And we plan both on a month-by-month basis currently, as well as, if I'm completely honest, on a weekly basis. We've moved to emergency budgeting. And actually not because of cash flow issues, but we found that it's far more relevant for how changing the pandemic is currently. And it has far more relevancy to all the decisions that we're making. And I think that's become true of the capital campaign for us as well. In some ways, the income hasn't really changed in the last year for us in terms of how much we've brought in. From about March 2020 onwards, we haven't really raised that much additional capital income. But
because all those foundations that we were looking at have been closed to capital, haven't they? Absolutely.
Yeah, so completely understandably, but there's been suddenly a massive need for us to all stop being so competitive as organisations and to work together to save as many organisations as possible, so that when we do have a chance to reopen, we're not the only fringe theatre in London, but there's a diverse fringe theatre network across the UK. And so I completely agree with that, but it's changed how we think about opening the new space. I think it's also made us question which bits of the new space we maybe don't need or don't want, or how we'll use it in a slightly better way than before we were just building the same theatre that everybody builds. And I think actually we're now asking, I think, more interesting questions.
And Liam, is that the same for you? Because obviously you've been more involved in the planning stage at this point, but has your thinking evolved as well as a result in your approach? Matthew, it's great to see you back. I'll come to you in a moment.
I had to switch device. Computer just decided not to do anything. So yeah, apologies, go for it.
Don't worry, I'm just going to let Liam jump in and then I'll come straight back to you. Just finishing on capital there.
Yes, definitely. Capital. We were in a stage in our capital programme where we were still in the design phase. So we'd only just received planning and going into detailed designs. And because it's got major public funding, Welsh Government are funding in the realm of £25 million towards this. The business planning around that is really interesting. Green Book 5-point business cases, if anybody wants to know about that. Walk away is my advice, actually. They're so horrifically technical and detailed. But how do we make spaces that could be pandemic proof? How do we help that drive on our environmental impact in the project even more than we had? And again, how do we put people's decision making rather than team members at the heart of the capital project? It's a lot to do with that. Actually, the delivery of the project is very similar just a year later.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think we've all, just as we say, become focused on those themes of purpose and audience, and that applies to the capital as well. Matthew, so good to have you with us. Glad the tech is working. Would you tell us a little bit about Bound Cinema and your business planning and what you've been up to?
Yeah, so, that moment just now is just a prime example of adapting to special times. And I think, it's the best way to describe what the past few months have been like. And it's coming up to a year now. But I guess the biggest challenge for us is previously when running Bounce Cinema, all our revenue came from tickets. Like literally 95% of it came from tickets. We wasn't really applying for any funding streams. It was very alien to that world, despite the fact that I was even actually being a funder at the BFI. So for us, things have flipped tremendously. Like we can't sell tickets for our physical live experiences. We're still doing, audience engagement activity and events, but we've made them free because we feel like in this time, we want to have as less barriers as possible for our audience and our community. But it means that I've had to develop some new skills in terms of, fundraising, filling out lots of applications, doing all these budgets, like you said, terminology, what the hell is reserves? What is this reserves policy? Figuring out lots of stuff. And it's been an interesting experience, and it's taught me a lot. And I think the biggest lesson that it taught me is, my responsibilities as the director of the organization, knowing my strengths, but also, there comes a time when you need to expand and get people who know their stuff a lot better than you and trusting in them. So for us, it feels like running Bounce at the moment has been interesting because I would just compare it to, building a new football team who's playing together for the first time. And the coach needs to be really good at articulating, their vision, what we stand for, and keeping everyone motivated. So I guess key learnings, and I think a lot of people have touched on this already in terms of why it's so important to know your values, because when you're doing these funding applications and you're, applying for money, you really need to understand, what do you want to achieve out of this rather than just getting funding in the bank. So, staying close to our audience, speaking to our audience, the more we help them, the more we get inspired to help them more. And that really drives us. So I guess I'm excited about what the future looks like because I feel like we're finding our rhythm. We're getting some bits of track record with some funders. And right now, my focus, I would say, is, what can we do now to ensure that we come out in an even stronger position when we're allowed back into venues and physical experiences. So yeah, that's us.
Thanks, Matthew. It's great to get an insight into your journey, and congratulations on everything you've achieved so far. I love your point about understanding your responsibilities as the director of the organisation, but also knowing where you need to look to for help and when you need that help. And I suppose the first question that I'd really love to put to you all is, and Matthew, thinking about you and assembling a group of people around you as you start to formalise Bounce Cinema, I'm really thinking about your relationship with your boards and how that's changed over the last year, because I'm conscious that the many organisations we work with, we've seen very varied situations, sometimes boards really getting deeply involved beyond perhaps what their remit had been, and then it's been very interesting to see people try and manage that back to a longer term position. So Fiona, perhaps I can come to you first. How's that been over at the King's Head?
So we've had not only the pandemic to deal with in 2020, but we also in September had our artistic director of 10 years step down.
Only one of two ever artistic directors, I think I'm right in saying. Yeah.
Only one of two ever, which has made for really interesting timing, therefore, with what our relationship with our board looks like. Partially because there's only been two artistic directors, our board have had a chance, I would say, to step in as more of a board of trustees in a traditional sense, and been given a bit more freedom. But we've also chosen not currently to recruit for a new artistic director, but instead we've had a board member step down and step into that role. And that's created a whole new interesting platform of what is the relationship like with the board. And I actually think for the first time ever has made brilliant dialogue between staff team and board team. So something that we definitely struggled with in the past, a lot of our staff team are in roles and responsibilities for the first time. It's an emerging venue for the artists as much as it is for the staff team. and to create, I guess, good narrative with the board has been really difficult in the past. And actually, this has really changed it's become more of a level playing field. We also, just because we were terrified about not getting CRF funding initially, so the Cultural Recovery Fund, we furloughed as many of our staff team as possible. Really early on, earlier than a lot of organisations last year, we went in all guns blazing, furloughing. And that's also meant that our board have had to be incredibly active to make sure that the organisation still exists and still has forward progression. A capital campaign, I think, has some advantages to needing you to continually drag forward, even if nothing is happening on the revenue side.
That's so interesting, Fiona, and really interesting about that level playing field that you've created and that dialogue. And I'll be really interested to see how that continues at the next stage. So Liam, coming to you next, this is really interesting because you're moving from being that local authority governed institution into the charity for the first time. So quite a time to make that transition.
Yeah, and some would say it's a bad time, but actually it's given. So I've had 5 boards to manage during this time. Because we've had shadow boards and different kind of charities coming online at different moments. And the shadow board have been meeting monthly, but with their sole concentration on the deal of independence, if you like, from a local authority. And that's given them a lot of ownership and focus on the future rather than the now, which has really helped me, if I'm honest, because there is no way I think we could have kept them up to speed as a board. Things have changed so quickly. We all know there's a plan one day, it's different the next day, and you've got to be responsive. And we're employed as a senior team and a wider team to deal with that and keep the board informed. So that's the way we've played it. We've just kept them up to date and they felt comfortable enough with that. And they've had something really to get their teeth into, both governance and capital, that's future looking, which has been helpful.
It's definitely probably the ultimate way to start a board off, I would imagine. And boy, those people are signing up to those positions, so you know they're with you and behind you. So yeah, no, it's really interesting to hear that. And Matthew, from your side, who are the people that you're reaching out to? How are you choosing them and how are they helping you at the moment?
I think it's an interesting question because during this chapter, I joined my first board and at the same time, I'm building my first board as well.
Right.
So in terms of who I'm reaching out to, I really had to, question, okay, what does the organization need? What are the skills gaps? What are my expectations of the people that are going to be coming along from this journey with us? And, what's been important to us is, having a strong balance of different people from different backgrounds, different regional locations. So traditionally, we've been, reaching out to artists, people that come from a financial background. But I think it's so important understanding that it's a beautiful thing because when you're running your organization, it can feel so isolated. And now you've got people that really, believe in your mission and are ready to, be hands-on to support it. So yeah, it's been interesting.
It's good and good always to have those people around you. And as we said, what a test for them to come behind you at this time and a learning experience. And as Fiona said, actually being on a pretty level playing field with the staff in terms of responsibility. I'm really interested to hear how all of you are really approaching your audiences in your business planning. So obviously for all of you, you've talked about how ticket income has to date, and Fiona, your model shifted somewhat, I'm very proud to say, but audience and ticket income has been a really big part of your business models. How are you all thinking about that going forward, and how are you reinventing that and getting your boards to back you in those models as you look forward? Fiona, if you want to go first.
I think one of the things I found hardest when I first joined the King's Head over any other organisation is that by being such a long-standing venue, what I would describe as our community, more than audiences, because I think we also have core creatives and core artists and core people who sit and drink in the pub as much as core paid ticket members. So our community believes the venue is far more theirs than it's mine. And I've never really experienced that at another venue that I've worked for. And I think that's made it really humbling in 2020 to be the person who has been held responsible by the community to save their space. And I think that's, if I'm honest, I found that really emotionally draining, to be that responsible for a venue that is so core to a lot of people's identities. A massive part of the King's Head's identity is around its commitment to LGBTQIA+ voices. And a huge part of our audience says that that's an integral part of where they feel safe. And to suddenly have that space removed overnight and be questioning how you can provide still the space or the, I guess, asset of community value almost. That's a coined phrase that people use to save spaces, but it's also really true. How do you have that as Liam said, that social space when we don't have the thing that we're used to creating, which is we're used to creating, I guess, a physical interaction crossover point for what we therefore say as audiences. Yeah, really, I don't really know the answer.
No, it's really interesting how being a civic organisation gives you so much responsibility. I mean, it's an incredibly important position in the community to hold, but at the same time, quite understandably, it brings a tremendous amount of responsibility. And yeah, it's clear you feel that very strongly, Fiona. Absolutely. And I'm sure that's partly why you've done as well as you have. Liam, you've done some remarkable work with your different audience groups during COVID. And in fact, you were celebrated through the Achates Philanthropy Prize for that. How is that now filtering into your business planning as well?
Yeah, well, thank you for recognising in the awards. That was really, really kind, a real boost for the team. I think it's just moved it closer to the centre. Like I said before, we were on that journey anyway, but during a time when we couldn't sell tickets or ice creams or gin and tonics or all of the other things that come around that we think are important for bottom line. They are important for bottom line, but we think are important and they're not. The only thing we've been able to do is help people, and that has stood us in good stead, actually. So how do we take that forward? And this pandemic has shone a light on many things, hasn't it? But I think that drive for financial resilience that we've been, by funders, encouraged to build up, those who have been really successful at that are the ones who have been hardest hit. So if anything, it makes me want to lobby harder for more public funding for arts, because they're so important to strong societies, to strong communities, and so that it's not transactional with people. It's a conversation. What do they want? What do they need? How can we serve them? Because then we're going to be in a stronger place. Just driving bottom line shouldn't be the main aim, I don't think.
Well, anybody who's been listening along to Achates Live in the recent months will know those are words close to my heart. So moving from the transactional to the relationship is surely the key to the thriving cultural sector that we all want. Matthew, how's this working out for you? Because obviously you work very closely with those young filmmakers, that community. How's that really informing your planning?
It's informed our planning a lot, and it's been a reminder of what we stood for and what we stand for, in physical live experiences. We want to give our audiences access. We want to give them the most fun experiences. We want to keep it fun, and we want it to be accessible. So for us, again, it's been applied to our online activity, and we've kept those same values that we've given our audiences stuff they just wouldn't have access to. So, we premiered stuff with Netflix. We've done talks with Steve McQueen. We've got some big names in who our audiences traditionally would have never had the opportunity to sit, in their living rooms with. And I think it's so important during this time as well, because we know social media can be, an amazing place, but also a very challenging place for lots of young people. So I guess our priority is just making sure that people have something that they can access, which is fun, but also us being mindful and knowing what our values are artistically. So we're not just churning out things that are not really that great for our audience. So again, it's been fun. We've been able to grow our audience substantially because everyone's online. And we've also been able to build some really, strong partnerships. So yeah, it's been positive.
I think what you're saying is you've acted with integrity, Matthew, and I know that's going to be really valuable going forward and has built those close communities around you, just as it has with Liam and Fiona. So I've got one more question, because we've got some questions coming through on the chat, which I want to put to you all, but I've got one more question from me. So I've used my metaphor from Wangari of the three-legged stool. What would your key sort of lessons for people thinking about business planning be going forward? Perhaps just one. I won't make you do a whole three-legged stool, but maybe just one thought that you would ask everybody to take and apply to their business planning. Fiona, you know I'm coming to you first.
I think that business planning at its heart is ultimately sitting down and making sure you know exactly who you are, why you're unique, and what you serve for your communities that others can't. And I think if you can answer those questions, business planning flows from that. And ultimately, that stuff for a lot of us hasn't changed in 2020 or in lockdown. The kind of who we are stuff, as much as, you know, for a lot of specifically art makers, connection and human interaction and storytelling maybe has changed, and the devices maybe changed, but our belief that art is for everyone hasn't changed.
Great, super. Liam, what's your sort of thinking for everybody approaching this?
I'm so glad you go to Fiona first each time, because it can give you a moment to think. I think it's really easy when you're a leader of any scale organisation to put all the pressure on yourself, that you have to come up with a business plan, you have to come up with a mission, the vision. And so my one piece of advice would be ask everybody else, because they'll come up with better ideas, and then you can frame it and you can mold it and get everybody on board. But yeah, that kind of collective thinking is probably the most powerful thing.
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure you're right. And as you say, anybody who pretends they know all the answers isn't telling the truth, are they? Matthew, what would you want everybody to think about when they're approaching their business planning?
I would say, you know, I definitely agree, make it super collaborative, but also, you know, when you're putting down those numbers, those metrics and that information, you know, have some empathy. You know, people need to understand, you know, the reasoning behind your decisions and the why. Because, you know, if you're saying, okay, these are our financial targets for the year, let's just focus on the impact that's going to bring to the communities and the work we're doing, and just make it fun. Like, don't make it seem like a, you know, a prison or some, you know, really restrictive thing. Make it adaptable, because those are the times that we're in.
I'm sure that is an excellent piece of advice, and boy, do we need to make things fun right now as well. Absolutely, it's too easy for everything just to become another chore. On this note, I've got a question coming through from Emily at Slide Dance, and she's saying that they've recently set up a consultation group with participants, teachers, carers, etc., to ensure they're including voices in their planning. Have any of you been doing something similar? Fiona, have you been doing that at King's Head?
Yeah, so we do quite a lot of community consultation work. I would say the one thing I'd always be careful with around community consultation is there's a lot of marketing research that shows that a similar group of people do things like answer surveys. So, for example, it tends to be that women over the age of 60 are more likely to answer surveys than, say, men under the age of 25. So I'd just be careful around using that kind of normal marketing tactics to inform what your audience is thinking. And perhaps Caroline made a really good point earlier about we can't be for everybody. So for us, we definitely have 3 target audiences that I can write down and put a pin in. And I could quite easily, even though it's a little bit of extra work, write to probably 10 people that I know sit within those audience profiles. And not many of them would be the classic marketing email responder of a woman over 60. So just be careful about how, I would say, how data can skew community consultations and answers.
It's a really good point, and it's an interesting thing about he who speaks loudest, and it isn't always the representative voice, I guess. Liam, from your side, how is your very deep community work you've been doing in this period? How are you taking that forward in your planning?
We did consultation around our capital planning. That was very specific. And the way that we found that worked best was making it really creative. You know, getting away from the surveys and kind of going through the mechanisms, be it music, theatre, dance, whatever, that kind of serve us most. It just we came up with far more interesting conversations, I think. As far as kind of day to day, all we do is try and listen. Because I think apart forming those consultations too much is fine for a finite kind of piece of work, but more widely in that, it's just listening day to day to what people.
So it's actually embedding it into your day to day. Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And Matthew, from your side, presumably your very way of approaching things is about stakeholders having a voice. Is that right?
Definitely.
And how are you formalising that in your process? Is that about people coming on potentially the board, or what will you be doing?
For us, you know, it's making sure our board is reflective of the communities that we're impacting, which is super important, and our team. And then alongside that, it's just about speaking to people directly, who has been coming to our events consistently, who has been along with us on this journey, and getting on the phone or Zoom and really listening to their needs and getting feedback in different ways. So post events, speaking to people, but also just looking at the metrics, how our community responds to things, how many people are signing up, how long are they staying on that Zoom account when we do the live session. So, it's a mixture of things.
Very smart. So you've got the real qualitative and the quantitative there. So you've got that mix of evidence base. That's really great. So a really interesting question come through from Liz at Cambridge Junction. And she's asked about the local and how important that's going to become. And she said, I think local will be even more important going forward. We might gain audiences that won't travel to London as much, but may lose ones that used to travel further afield. Is that something any of you have been thinking about at all? Fiona, from your side, it's a really interesting thing. You've got that close focus on Islington, but obviously a very central in London as well.
Yeah, so I would say, interestingly, our audiences are hugely split between, specifically when we programme opera, we have a huge amount of audience travel for it, whereas anything else we programme has a real locality to it. And I think the thing that is interesting is watching, as we move work online, the distance increase of people engaging with our work. So we continue to be more of an international platform for opera, but ultimately emerging artists are still very much focused either regionally or on London. I think ultimately at its heart, a lot of our spaces are designed for community connection. And that's why I ask that question regularly. Why are we in Islington? It's not a cheap place to be based. And I think we as an organisation have to believe that we serve our community in Islington, as well as others who may travel to it. That's really true in Cambridge as well. Cambridge, not a cheap place to be based. So if we aren't speaking to our local community, I think there's a big question there as to, well, why are we there?
Absolutely. Liam, how about that from your side?
Well, we have shocking public transport in North Wales, actually across Wales, massive underinvestment. It sounds like I'm going really nationalist. I'm not completely, but lack of investment from Westminster in the devolved nations. So it's really difficult for people without the resources to get to us. We've got a huge drive time. And I think it's about kind of balancing. It's looking, we've talked about kind of data sets. Cinema over the last 5 years has become more and more localized for our venue, whereas the theatre work has grown, so now nearly 2-hour kind of drive time. That alongside us going out and working with our really local communities are probably our kind of 3 tiers of how we're looking at it, how we're approaching it.
Fantastic. And Matthew, from your side, film's such an interesting medium, and as you've said, it's enabled you to reach really diverse audiences. What are you thinking? Are you thinking as kind of a local and an international? How will it configure for you?
I would say when we first started our organisation, our ambitions have always been international. And what's been interesting in terms of the roadmap of what we're doing is, we kicked off in London, but we're a venue-less organisation, so we move around, and our audiences move around based on where we go. So it's all about, us introducing audiences to new venues. But we used to get lots of messages from people in like Birmingham, the Midlands, Nottingham. What about us? Like, it's not fair. And it's not fair. There needs to be great investment outside of London. And what's been beautiful is when we look at the statistics, we're getting people from all over the UK, Europe, coming to our online activity. So strategically, as soon as things open up again, we want to be serving audiences, particularly across the UK. So I wouldn't say, we're not super local because we're a pop-up. So we're always going to be moving around and working with different audiences and communities.
Well, I am sure that those audiences are going to be staying with you as we move back into the whatever the new world is that we're progressing towards. But Kane, I think that's probably the moment for me to hand back to you now to thank our participants for all their fantastic insights today and to tell us a little bit more about our next session.
Thank you very much, Caroline. And thank you so much to Fiona, Matthew and Liam for speaking today. And sorry, Matthew, with your technical issues. And to everyone for watching at home and for all of your brilliant questions. Yeah, and so really all that is left to say is to remind everyone firstly that we will be circulating our business planning survey later this month, and we do hope that you can contribute. And
yeah, it would be fantastic to complement the incredible case studies that we've had today from Liam, Fiona and Matthew with those statistical insights. So yeah, please do take part. Thank you.
And finally, we look forward to seeing you all back here on Tuesday, the 9th of March, for our next session, which will focus on individual giving with the snappy title. I didn't come up with this one, Caroline very much did. Long distance relationships, keeping donors close through to reopening. So we will see you again a month from now in March. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Kane. And just to say, if you want to discuss your business planning needs, you know where we are. Do get in touch. We've got a range of packages from coaching through to key areas of focus, and we'd be always happy to talk through your needs with you. But as Kane said, it really just leaves us to thank our three fantastic panelists today.